Okay, so in this video, we are going to talk about the demand and supply of oil and natural gas. So I think this basically covers off the driving factors of demand for both oil and natural gas, but also how price plays an intermediary role in, between that demand and supply of these commodities. Uh, it also, I think, on the supply side, it also talks about various scenarios. So, for example, if no new capex expenditure happens in the oil and natural gas industry, what the decline rate for those oil wells is going to be, stuff like that. But I think there is I sort of felt that there is a bit more emphasis on the demand side, because I think naturally too, when we think of the EV, when we think of the transition towards clean energy, we do think that it's going to be, we need to control the demand first, and then the supply will take care of itself. So anyways, moving into it, so we will first cover off the demand for both oil and natural gas, and then I think we will move on to the supply side. So, on the demand side, starting off with oil. So, according to the report, the global oil demand has increased by just over 1 million barrel per day on average, between 2010 and 2019. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic did cause a drop of 9 million barrel per day in demand in 2020, but that has mostly rebounded after the pandemic. So the total oil demand in 2022 stood somewhere around 97 million barrel per day, approximately. So basically, what we are saying is that 1 million barrel per day uh, between 2010 to 2019 lost, and the total demand for oil till now in the year 2022 has been 97 million barrel per day, approximately. Now, one thing to note here is that this report came in 2023. So the base year that this report considers is actually 2022. So we are already, you know, 3 years or 4 years further down the line when this report came. So I think that shouldn't change the way we look at the report, because it's more about the essence of what they are saying rather than, being more cynical about the numbers, because these numbers might have changed because years have passed. But the end story, the essence of the report should still remain, because I think personally one thing that I'm really liking about this report is that it's really debunking a lot of misconceptions I had in my mind, where for me, and I think for everybody or most people, it's always been that, when you transition towards clean energy, uh, the legacy industries, oil and gas and other fossil fuels, anything that emits uh, gases, any harmful substances in the air, they need to go away. We need to completely go to zero. But I think it's been really helpful in me understanding how the industry actually operates and what the future realistically will look like. Uh, and I think it also makes you look at those industries in a more sympathetic way, rather than considering them as the bad guys and the EV players or the new age technologies as the good guys. Because for those who don't know, EVs actually produce, for example, if we take the example of EVs actually produce a lot more emissions compared to an ICE car when they leave the factory floor. The reason for that is, I think that the main difference is basically the emissions, where you are measuring the emissions basically. So you can measure the emissions at the production level, or you can measure the emissions at uh, the consumer level, or let's say the maintenance level, that once the vehicle has left the factory floor, how much emission is it creating in the air. So EVs, because they use a lot of rare earth materials and other important minerals, they require that deep mining, and that releases a lot of emissions in the air. So whereas an ICE car, it releases emission throughout its life, but doesn't release that much emission when it's just being produced and leaving the factory floor. But the idea behind EV is that we will concentrate those emissions at a single place rather than 1 million vehicles on the road producing those emissions, because it's easier to control one location rather than uh, controlling a million sources of emission. So that's the basic idea. Anyways, I think, yeah, this report really did help me uh, recalibrate my thinking a lot. Okay, anyways, moving on. So I think the final thing, the one more thing we did read was that COVID actually COVID resulted in the loss of 9 million barrels per day of demand. Now, oil, I think the next section is pretty much looking at the ways oil is currently being used in the industry, because in the general consumer market, because oil is really one of the major energy sources for our whole world economy. Uh, just for instance, oil is currently being used, or yeah, I think currently being used for 25. I don't know if used is the right word, but I'm not framing it well. But let's try it this way. So, demand sources of oil. So, one major industry that has always demanded a lot of oil is transportation, which roughly uses somewhere around 50% of total crude demand. Uh, Now, why do we say that? We say that because oil has been used to supply roughly 25 trillion passenger kilometers in cars, 30 trillion ton kilometers for trucks, and 320 million tons of high value chemicals. But that's it sits outside uh, transportation. So 25 trillion personal vehicles and 30 trillion tons for trucks, basically commercial vehicles. So the main gridlock, as you can already see, is transportation. Now, fortunately, there is a way for us to move, towards cleaner energies in transformation, but only in the personal vehicle segment for now, and not in the commercial vehicle segment, because yeah, we don't have enough EV innovation and penetration in commercial trucks at present. Anyway, so the report mentions that with the way things are going, with the way the governments are currently working, and the initiatives that they have in place now to transition to cleaner energy, oil demand should reach its maximum level of around 100 million barrel per day in by the end of this decade, pretty much, and then it should decline to 97 million barrel by 2050. I mean, that sounds pretty absurd, to be honest, because when I read this, it's basically what we are basically saying is that the current demand is 97 million barrels today, and in the next what 25 years or so, we are still going to remain here. That's pretty much what we are saying. This is based considering what we are doing at present, what the governments and companies are doing at present, which is, if you think about it, pretty absurd. Basically, we have not improved at all, or we are not doing enough to change anything. The main reason why this is because, uh, although there is going to be a large decline of oil use in normal passenger cars, buildings and power generation, stuff like that, most of this is going to be offset by growth of oil use in trucks, aviation, and petrochemicals. So I think these are the three industries that we also talked about in part one, where it's really hard to transition these industries currently based on the innovation, and also with the way things are in these industries, because uh, you can think of hydrogen powered trucks, but the penetration is still low, and there's you also need to think about the feasibility of those technologies, because with more refined fuel, the power that fuel will supply to an engine is going to reduce, and trucks specifically need a lot of power to transport those goods, carry those goods to unorthodox terrain sometimes. So you can't just pull the plug for oil and then hope things work out. You need to be methodical about it. So that's the main challenge we are facing, that with the way things are currently going, we are basically stuck for the next 25 years and things won't change. Uh, but anyways, transportation, the good part, let's focus on the good part. The good part is that personal vehicle segment is still, we have found a way to transition towards cleaner fuel, cleaner energy, and the main sort of catalyst for that has been the rise of electric vehicles. So the EV market has been growing in recent years, and as of 2023, roughly 20% of all cars that were sold were EVs. Now, in the scenario, in the APS scenario, where governments and companies are able to keep doing what they are currently doing, but also meet the commitments that they have made, we should see the rise of EV car sales to nearly 45% in 2030 and 80% by 2050. So what we are saying is that EV sales are currently 20% in 2023, and if we do everything we can, or if we not everything we can, because that would be the NZE scenario, but if we can meet all of our current commitments, it should rise to 45% by 2030 and 80% by 2050. Now, just something on this. I think so. The move towards EV, I think it's still. I mean, I think I see around me. I see the things that governments are doing, and as I think this is the only segment or industry, as far as I have read and I have understood and seen things around me, that I am hopeful about. Because if I see in India specifically, just today I think, or was it yesterday, the Delhi government in India, which Delhi is the capital of India, they have announced a policy to basically promote EVs in the state. So what they have said is that they won't register new three wheelers starting next year, and they won't register new two wheelers starting 2028. And people who buy four wheelers EV will get an exemption on their road tax and registration fee. So uh, I think that report also talks about how demand and supply needs to go together, and how do you ensure that by providing consumers some benefit to support this transition. uh, but yeah, anyways, I think this is the most hopeful industry that I also see around me. uh, I think one more thing it talked about was hydrogen powered engines. So I think, yeah, that's what I just mentioned before this, that there can be more innovative work done to promote electric and hydrogen heavy trucks, but yeah, it's still pretty minimal. But in the APS scenario, if we do meet our commitments, the report states that we do see uh, for commercial vehicles, we do see that the electric and hydrogen trucks are currently only 1% of total sales, so they should increase by 20% in 2030, and then 60% in 2050. Now, I think this is sort of a stretch, because you need to, I think, also understand about the, I think you also need to consider the political element. So if I specifically talk about my country, India, it's I think the trucking industry is still pretty disorganized, and because it is disorganized, it is a pretty straightforward vote bank for whichever government, whichever administration wants to come into power or is already in power. Because that sector is disorganized, there's going to be people who are coming from uh, less fortunate backgrounds. So they would need that handouts from the government to make their lives better and progress in their lives. So they hold some importance in the eyes of the government. Now, consider the fact that currently all trucks, almost all trucks, uh, use diesel as power for their power. Now, diesel, as we all know, so it's a well-known fact, but in case you don't know, it's easy to mix, not easy, but yeah, easier to mix petrol and ethanol, and basically in as a result you get a much more refined petrol which releases less emissions in the environment. But it is much more difficult to, so one thing is you cannot mix, let's change the color, you cannot mix ethanol and diesel. This is just plain not possible. So there's another uh, chemical that you can use in diesel, which I hope I pronounce it right, isobutamil. I think this is, yeah, the spelling is definitely wrong, but it's somewhere along these lines. So you can mix ethanol with petrol, but you cannot. You need to use another chemical to mix with diesel. Now, this is a pretty expensive process. Even mixing petrol and ethanol is a pretty expensive process because uh, it's a complex process, right? So it takes money, it takes cost, and ethanol is also not so cheap because it's directly connected to the agriculture sector. So you need to compensate the farmers and the agri sector well. So basically, for the end consumer, the price of oil is not going to change much. So currently in India, most of our oil is E20, but we know that the government is planning towards E20 to 25, then E30, eventually E85, even E100 is also being introduced in some auto expos, and they also showcased some cars and some bikes which can run on E85 and E100. But you need to understand that with more refinement, the power that that fuel will provide to a vehicle is going to go down. But if the price that the end consumer pays for that fuel doesn't change, then there's no incentive for the end consumer to really buy that cleaner vehicle, because there has to be some, you cannot do it just because you love the world, love the environment. You have to have a direct impact on your life as well, because at the end of the day it's you who is going to pay for this transition. So there has to be some benefit over, as to why you would choose an EV or a hybrid, uh, or a flexi fuel vehicle over a, raw IC petrol diesel vehicle. Because if you look at it, diesel is actually much more efficient, it's much more pocket friendly compared to petrol, because diesel provides more power to your vehicle, and the per liter fuel economy that it provides over petrol, we all know it's a more efficient fuel, but it's just not good for the environment. uh, so that's the main challenge, that if you try to, you know refine diesel and the costs go up, or the cost don't go down, because you need to understand that even if let's say diesel, I refine it at a 50%, and diesel is now 80%, 85%, and the rest 15% is that chemical. So basically, the price for that diesel for me has already automatically gone up, because I'm not getting that same amount of fuel, because that fuel is going to give less power to my truck. So I'm already paying more for that 1 liter, unless the government subsidizes me. Yeah. So yeah, that's the main challenge, I think, because you are basically charging the truckers who really are the backbone of most of the economies. So you cannot just get in a head-on battle with them. You need to keep them happy, because of that political element. So there can be this challenge as well, especially in a country like India, which is, yeah, still evolving in that sense. Anyway, so this was road transport. Now, finally, in the NZ scenario, just one more thing to mention. In the NZ scenario, where we do everything we can to reach net zero, the report suspects that there should be no ICE cars that are being sold by 2035, and by 2040, all trucks should be either electrically powered or hydrogen, or should use hydrogen powered engines. Now, to promote this transition towards a cleaner, you know, cleaner fuel for in the transportation sector, the one thing that the governments can do is also improve the public transport in their country, so that people generally feel less need to have their own vehicle. Uh, so these behavioral change matters a lot. So, for example, if you know about Singapore is a very small island, but if you look at, the I'm sure you must have heard about the engineering feats, and the general development in that country. And considering the size and the history and the age of that country, it's mesmerizing, it's mind blowing. But one thing Singapore is pretty smart about is they know they don't have a lot of space, but people are still, you cannot say that there is an adequate number of people living there. It will be that they will face a strain on their resources as their population rises. We already know that Singapore doesn't have fresh water, so they need to import most of that water to meet their demand. Now, if they allow everybody in their country to own a personal vehicle, there would be no space left for actual human beings to live. So what they have done is, if you look at the road transport policy for that country, uh, and this is not, this stat is not verified, but I've heard people mention this to me, so please double check this. But from what I have heard, in Singapore, if your vehicle costs 100,000, your road tax is going to be more than that. So they do this to demote the use of personal vehicles, and to ensure that this policy is successful, they have really built a very very uh, well connected public transport system where people don't really feel the need to own a personal vehicle, because anywhere and everywhere they need to go, they can just use a public transport. So that, I think, these things are really important, as the report mentions as well, that there needs to be an incentive for people to give up something from their life. The next thing that the report talks about is aviation. So aviation is one of those industries that is, going to be pretty hard to transition towards cleaner fuel, because again, if airplanes use a lot of fuel, a lot of diesel, and they need that power to um, operate. And we haven't heard, I mean, at least I haven't heard of an EV plane as of yet, or a hydrogen based plane. But aviation used around 5 million barrels of oil per day for for both domestic and international travel in 2022. Now there have been experiments with low emission fuels such as liquid biofuels and low emission hydrogen based liquids, but they still comprise less than 0.01% of fuel that is being used in aviation today. Now, in the APS scenario, the report states that we do suspect this percentage to grow by 5% in 2030 in the use of cleaner fuel mix with diesel, and over 35% in 2050. But yeah, we are yet to see, because there's pretty much no progress as of yet in aviation. So it's just words at present, and we are yet to see how this develops. Uh, I think the next one is shipping industry. So shipping industry is also going to be a bit difficult, because yeah, these are pretty big machinery, and you need that power to operate them. But I think shipping industry is pretty much similar to aviation, where they are also using around 5 million barrels of oil per day. Uh, and they also have a very low share coming from low emission fuels, around 0.2%, which is coming from biodiesel. Now, in the APS scenario, this also grows to around 50% by 2050. Finally, I think petrochemicals. So yeah, these last three industries are pretty hard to crack: aviation, shipping, and finally petrochemicals. And this, I think, in the first part too, I mentioned that this is probably going to be the uh, industry that is still going to remain alive, where the use of fuel is still going to remain alive for the foreseeable future. We just don't know, we cannot see of a future where oil doesn't exist in this industry as of yet. Because the main property of petrochemicals is, crude oil, is petrochemical feedstocks is basically the crude that you use to process to create that petrochemical product, basically. So petrochemical feedstocks, as an industry, as a refinery industry, it uses around 14 billion barrels of oil per day in 2022, mainly to produce plastics. Now, the demand for virgin plastics is only going to grow rapidly based on the current estimates. So Virgin plastics is plastic that has not been used before. It is not recycled. So when it leaves the factory, it is going to be put to use for the first time. So this is new production of plastic. And when you use it once and then it get recycled, it is no longer virgin plastic. But virgin plastic, as the name suggests, it's a first use. It's not been used before, so it's new in that sense. It's just newly created. Now there are a certain number of policies to ban or reduce single-use plastics and improve recycling rates, but they're not up to par at present. But in the APS scenario, we do expect that uh, these policies should increase the global average collection rates for plastic waste from 16% today to 37% in 2050. But yeah, we are yet to see how this turns out. But despite of all this, we do estimate that the oil use in feedstock, petrochemical feedstock, would still increase by zero point 0.6 million barrels per day to 2030, and then it will basically keep on rising till 2050. The report says it will decline only slightly by 2050, but I think that is too precise of an estimate they are trying to give us. But so yeah, you can pretty much say that virgin plastics, it's pretty much here to stay for the foreseeable future. Now this is pretty much it for oil demand. Next, we will move on to natural gas.